Okay, so just to get it started off, my name is Colby Jumis. I did my final project on the effect of poverty on housing affordability, specifically the effect of Black people or African Americans in poverty on the median housing price at the county level. Being a Black man myself who grew up in poverty and several relatives who fit in such categories as well, this is something that hits home to me personally, so I felt it worthy of exploration. Go into it, developing my hypothesis, the effect of being Black or African American in poverty, what that had on the housing price at county level, something wanted to examine. The no hypothesis would, of course, be being Black or African American in poverty has no impact on housing price at the county level. And then my hypothesis would be being Black or African American in poverty impacts median housing prices at county level. So a little bit about the data. We're going to utilize data from the U.S. Census Bureau. This is procured from the American Community Survey, which was done in about 2017. And we'll be examining data associated between variables of the county level. Our explanatory variable, or also known as the independent variable, is being Black or African American poverty. The response variable, also known as dependent variable, be the median housing price at the county level. We'll have a variety of other explanatory variables as well, mostly demographic related, such as education, language, things along those lines. So diving into the data, the initial data we can see here, home affordability and Black poverty. From this test we ran, we're able to effectively get a percentage population that occurs for each variable. The first three rows, because that's all this is, the first three rows, they indicate kind of like a little bit of the correlation we'll see to come, but also the variance in the data. So say we see here 0.00123, that's such a low number. It's essentially, we can kind of assume that county, it just probably does not have a large, just Black population as a whole, let alone poverty population as is. So looking at our descriptive results from our 5-point summary, so these, again, we have all our demographic variables, and then we have our Black poverty variables here. So our data shows honestly what we'd expect given our hypothesis. So the min is 0 for our variable, which suggests that there are counties in which it just doesn't occur altogether. But the max is 44.2%, which suggests that there are areas with, that shouldn't be percent, my bad. But it shows that there are areas where there are large Black poverty ratios compared to some where there's not. There's also some where there's high. So if you kind of think areas like Chicago or Detroit, places along those lines where there is a lot of people living in poverty, specifically in certain counties. So in our dependent variable, home affordability, shows obvious skew with our standard deviation being a 1.137. And we can see that here. So both Black poverty, which we looked at, and home affordability, which are our main two variables, both are showing a right skew. So they're not following normal distribution. This would normally suggest correlation, but we'll take a look at that a little later. Worth noting is that population Black as well is almost right in line with Black poverty, which again suggests correlation. So after our log transformation, we see Black poverty and population Black are still pretty close. However, home affordability is more close to a normal curve. So this suggests less of a correlation, and it can likely be attributed to looking at the population Black and then the total population, and just how they too do not correlate. So I'm looking at our correlation plot. We find here Black poverty, and then we go ahead and look for home affordability, which is right here. So we see we have a correlation of roughly 0, which we'll be able to interpret that more a little later, but it's showing that there isn't essentially a correlation between, just based off this, a correlation between I get being Black in poverty and the home affordability price. However, we do see population Black and Black poverty. Obviously, that makes sense for those two to be collinear. Then we have speaking Spanish and population Hispanic. It makes sense for those to be collinear. People who are Hispanic are more likely to speak Spanish. We also have graduate degree and bachelor's degree are fairly strongly correlated as well, which you can reasonably expect that people who have a bachelor's degree or people who have a graduate degree are going to have a bachelor's degree. It's you can't pick and choose. So looking at the home affordability in the U.S. counties by map, we can see a broad disparity between the Midwest and the East. Outside of here, like South Beach areas like that, you think like Biscayne Drive, a lot of rich folks around there. Houses are going to be more expensive. But over here, the entire West, we see California especially expensive, Hawaii expensive, even counties in Arizona are on the higher end of house price to income ratio. And then we of course we have outliers like this county in Wyoming. I'm not sure where that is, but I'm not trying to live there because to live in Wyoming and your house prices are that high compared to your income, that's just illogical, irrational. It doesn't make sense. So moving on, we've come to our regression model. And so looking here, our Black poverty in our second and third test, we see it roundabout at like negative 2.5. And with a negative 2.5, we do see that it's a negative correlation. And so we can look and we can say if we increase our Black poverty numbers by 10%, we can see a slight change in median housing pricing. It will drop by about 2.7%. And so we do see data here that suggests that we can reject the null hypothesis. So going down here, and then we look at our R-squared values, which all look pretty low, which means weak vector size. Again, it's only 2.7%, so that makes sense. And our S statistics actually look good as well. They show that the data is looking pretty solid with this test. So main findings. So of course we see that with a 10% increase in Black poverty, we see about a 2.7% decrease in median housing pricing. So what does this mean? Well, you have to look at it from a broader perspective. The Black population only is roughly 13% of the United States population. So if you were to take a true value number, I did the calculation out here, a true equivalent of a 2% decrease, should the Black population be 100% of the population, it would be roughly a 15% decrease in median housing costs. What this entails is that the Black poverty population does bear significance on median housing pricing as a whole. It means that like when you have Black poverty, you will see lower housing prices. It's fact. At least according to this data, it's the truth. And so ideally, you would want to look at locations that have high Black poverty dense areas, dense populations, and you would want to take those counties and you'd want to implement policy to combat that. You would know based off this data that Black people in poverty are going to have lower affordable houses, and you would want to implement policy to combat that in those areas. And of course, we have areas where that doesn't exist. Either the Black population isn't there or the Black poverty population isn't there. So you'd want to examine it truly on a county basis for your personal county. If I were a city planner, or not a city planner, I guess, county planner or something like that, then you would want to examine the Black poverty population. And from there, that can tell you how much that is affecting your median housing pricing. Okay. Well, that's all for this, Professor. Hope I get a good grade.